Hello, I'm here today for Radio Sidaji Jundiai, and I'm going to talk to you about my experience of the power of Ericksonian hypnosis and communication as a therapeutic tool, but especially the importance of knowing how to use this tool in the time of pandemic. One of the most difficult aspects for all of us in the pandemic is the social isolation and the lack of connection or engagement with other people. Yes, you talk to each other online, to the people in your immediate household you're talking, but remember, most of the time you're talking to people where you only see their eyes. So you're not getting facial expression and everything else, which in our neurobiology helps us to feel connected and safe. So one of the very different and important things about Erickson's work is that from the moment of first contact, it can be in the telephone call of a client that comes to see you, or as they walk in the door, you're automatically trained in a number of different ways and bodily ways to be making a connection, not just with words, not just with my conscious mind, but with the non-conscious mind. You know, it's easy to see in Erickson's work where he says, point blank, I really want to know who you are. But that has to emanate from you as well as, and I accept you just the way you are. Now, I'm talking about beliefs and attitudes, but beliefs and attitudes without the energetic, truly congruent feeling emanating from the therapist, I can tell you I'm interested in who you are. I can tell you I'm engaging with you. These are all words. We've all had that experience. You meet somebody and they're talking a mile a minute and you assume, or they say, oh, now I really feel connected to you. And I've had that experience and I'm feeling, no, you're connected to you and you're talking at me, but you're not talking with me. And really, you're more interested in what you have to say than what I have to say. And when a client comes to you, it's what the client says that's important. Erickson said that the role of the therapist or the facilitator is never to show how brilliant I am, but to show the client how brilliant they are. This is very, very different. And I'm in touch with my colleagues all over the world, and because I belong to several groups where we are working with how do you present online and how do you deal with the pandemic in all countries. And this idea that we're so isolated that we need to be engaged. Even I can tell you that I've been very successful online with people feeling I'm totally involved with them. And that comes from my training of how to join with the person in their tone of voice, in their body movement, in the cadence of their speech, and even using some of the words that they use, because when somebody non-consciously hears that you're using the language that they're used to, the phrases they're used to, they feel, oh, this is somebody who's trying to understand me. And we desperately need that in these times. We need it at all times, but amongst 18 to 25-year-olds around the world, the suicide rate has gone up by almost 30%. In Japan, they have such a high suicide rate resulting from the pandemic of women who feel so isolated and not engaged in the culture in the same way Japanese men are engaged in the culture, that it's now a pandemic of suicides. And people walking in the door or onto your computer here in Brazil they're already terrified and detached because our central nervous system reacts to what's happening around us and the mass media. And every day when you turn on your television or your radio, you hear so many more thousands died, and this test isn't working, and what's happening in Europe, and everybody has to shut down. And what's happening is that people are coming into your office, and when we are in danger, we can either fight, we can try and run away, but you can't fight corona, not in the usual ways. You can't run away because there are very few countries that will allow you to run into. And if we can't run away, if we can't fight, our neurobiology immediately starts to make us numb. Many of you listening to this already may feel very ambivalent. You're not sure you want to do this or that. You don't want to go out, or you were thinking of taking some training, but maybe this isn't the time. Most people are finding it very, very difficult to take decisions. They can't take decisions because their central nervous system has already shut down to the point that they are becoming frozen. I saw this the other day when I was in a shopping mall, and we encountered several salespeople, and I was asking about the price of different things, and they were traveling in the mayonnaise. They were answering me, but they were totally disconnected. They had already shut down. They might have been, past tense, good salespeople, but they weren't that day. Yeah, they were showing up for work, and they were trying to show up as best they could. So one of the tremendously important and powerful aspects of Erickson's work is that ability to connect cross-culturally. I worked with an indigenous Mayan women in Guatemala during the Civil War. And I can tell you that, first of all, we had to have somebody who spoke one of the 10 Mayan dialects. But the problem with that is we had to have somebody to translate my English into the Spanish so that that translator could translate into the dialect. And then hopefully that the Mayan that we were talking to was one of the dialects that translator knew would be translated back into Spanish and back to me. And many of my colleagues said, but how could you work that way? Well, you can't work that way if you're not Ericksonian, because you're all intellect and it's all verbal. 80 to 90% of all communication that's important, that makes a difference for the listener, is nonverbal. And a lot of the training to be Ericksonian, because you can pick up a book, you can pick up my book and read about Erickson's work. The difficulty is until you can think like Erickson, until you can emanate in your own style, because Erickson believed that every therapist should really present through who they are, that connection, that interest in the other person. And I can tell you, it immediately makes a big difference, especially in a time of pandemic, because people are so hungry for the connection. We see that in young children who aren't able to go to school, and they're retarded in their growth of their language in Portuguese because they're not playing with other children. They don't have that interaction. So many of the other therapeutic approaches, and I know them and I use them, but I have added greatly to my vocabulary. Erickson's work is not meant to replace anything you do, but it's something that really magnifies whatever you're using, especially since you connect in a wholly, entirely different way Now, what am I trying to say? I can connect to you right now if you explicitly tell me your problem. Oh, the problem I have is that I'm depressed, I've been isolated, I can't make decisions. If I begin to relate to you on that level, and of course I listen and do relate on that level, but that's all I relate to. Underneath is the implicit. I had somebody telling me that the other day. Oh, I feel a little depressed and so on. And I say, well, there's so many types of depression. What does depression mean to you? Oh, it means that I'm sleeping late. And said, well, what's happening when you're sleeping late? Well, I'd rather sleep late, otherwise I'm suicidal. Now, when the person says to you, oh, I'm feeling a little depressed and isolated, if you start working with that, you're not going to get the implicit information in time to really maybe prevent a suicide. And with the suicide rates going up, you really want to connect into the person where they're willing in the first session. You can't wait 5 sessions because they may only be alive for 4 sessions. So the power of being able to connect that way without depending on your intellect and without depending on language. Come on. We all know when we're in the presence of somebody who's interested in us. We all know, and I saw this when I traveled with the daughter of Milton Erickson, Betty Alice Erickson. She and I were colleagues. We co-taught. As a matter of fact, I brought her and we co-taught for the first time that she ever visited Brazil. But many people would come up to us and they'd say, Betty, I was really helped by your father and I just wanted to share with you. And Betty would always smile and say, and what did my father do? And they'd say, well, I'm not sure, but you know what? From the moment I walked in, this was a person who was interested in who I was and accepted who I was. And I could feel he just loved that I was alive and a human being. And she'd say, oh, and did he verbalize that? And every person would say, well, kind of, but he didn't have to. It's just how you experienced him. Now, we all have different styles, but that's part of learning to be Ericksonian. In your style, you emanate that. And everybody listening to me knows we need that kind of connection today. Now, what are some of the other major ways that Erickson's work has additional power? And, I started out in the field 55 years ago when the field was Freudian analysis. And I was trained by the very analysts that Freud trained and analyzed and sent to the United States, and I trained with them. And I also was so lucky because the field was that. As the field grew, I trained with Laura Pearls in Gestalt. I trained with Jay Marino in psychodrama. I've been very lucky to often be trained by the founders of different fields. Francine Shapiro and EMDR and working with trauma. So I've been with the people who originated, but what I can tell you, nobody would ever accuse Laura of, she did connect to you, but I wouldn't say you felt that she loved you. And I certainly wouldn't say that Fritz accepted you the way you were. Jean Parakis in bioenergetics definitely did not accept you the way you were. That doesn't devalue the contributions and the processes that they evolved, but it makes a really big difference because the way I connect, the way we join with each other, the way we co-create a profound field for profound learning. In other words, how do we proceed and how do we really become effective in changing our lives? we have to learn in a profound and a new, challenging way. And this kind of engagement, this kind of connection says, I'm seen, I'm heard, and this person is interested in me and sees I have value. Now, I know how I felt growing up and how I felt in different situations in my life. And I can tell you, I've spent a lot of time not feeling I was heard by people who loved me in different ways. A lot of time with people where I wasn't seen, and a lot of time where I was told, if you do it this way, if you proceed that way, you're of value. Excuse me. I can certainly tell you that deep inside, let's call it my inner wisdom, I know when I'm being seen. I know when I'm being heard. And I know when the person accepts me and I'm unique as a human being. And this is another power of Erickson's work. He said, I don't use protocols. And I remember when I first started training, I thought, how can you do therapy without protocols? Well, it's very simple. A protocol assumes that we're all the same. If I say I'm depressed, I'm the same as the next depressed person or the next depressed person. If I say I'm suicidal, here are the 6 things we can do around suicide. If I have a diagnosis of, bipolar, I can tell you, I've never seen a depressed person, a suicidal person, a bipolar person who's exactly the same. It's totally different. So one of the competencies, the abilities that I had to develop is what is called tailor-made. If I want to go buy a suit, I guess I can go to Walmart or the equivalent, and I can get a suit. I can, this looks, maybe it needs to be taken in a little bit. I can go to the shopping mall and I can go to PC Richards. I can buy a suit, and it's a finer quality. It's stitched better. The material is better. Or I can go to a very fine tailor where they make the suit exactly to my comfort level and my measurements, and it's beautifully tailored, and I may have to go for 2 or 3 fittings because that suit will fit me, but it doesn't fit anybody else. So one of the powerful things that Erickson is talking about is every person is unique, so I can improvise. That's not a protocol. In other words, there may be some generalities that I can pick up, but I have to improvise. I have to create in the moment that exchange, that connection, and I have one goal: to open up new possibilities for you. But by respecting that you're different than the person I saw an hour ago, or I'm going to see 4 hours from now, I'm going to improvise directly in relationship to you. Now, I think you can already hear that it helps you to feel seen, it helps you to feel heard, and it helps you to feel of value. Another thing, especially in these times, but everybody walks in if they've been brave enough and courageous enough to say, I need help. And often, unfortunately, I for years said, what is your problem? But there's a big difference in Ericksonian languages. Could you tell me what issue you would like to bring into focus today? What is your problem already puts you in a down position? What issue? And often I'll say, what issue would you like to focus on today so that by the end of our hour, you really feel that you've moved forward? maybe a little step, maybe a big step, but you stepped forward. Because this is also Ericksonian, a functional life happens in a flow, and the flow is a step by step forward movement in your life. Most people expect they're going to have this huge insight, wow, and everything changes. That's not how human beings change. Every once in a while, yeah. But usually because there's been 20 steps, and then suddenly there's a meaning that emerges, and wow. But a little tiny step, which means you're moving forward, automatically, for instance, starts to erode the person who has some depression. So another ability or competency that you need to develop is the therapist utilizes the behavior that the client brings, and we don't look at it. I don't look at it as, oh, that's dysfunctional, that something's wrong with that, that's a problem. I rather have to be creative and innovative. Oh, let me give you an example, is that a client comes and says, I've been isolated, I've had some terrible illnesses, I've had to take care of myself, and I'm here because I don't know what else to do. She goes on to describe a portion of her life, and then she looks at me and says, Doctor, somehow I feel I can tell you this, I can't tell anybody else this, but I'm seriously considering suicide. Well, if I rush into protocols, she may even more seriously consider suicide. So how do I utilize this? I don't say, oh my God, that's terrible. How can you do that? A lot of therapists will say, life isn't that bad. Everything changes. That's even worse because you're then not hearing, listening to, you're advising, you're not opening up new possibilities. How do I utilize this person's behavior, which is, I think, going to kill myself? And so I just repeated what she said. You're absolutely right. You cannot go on living this way. You cannot go on living in isolation like this. You cannot go on living always having to take care of yourself. You cannot go on feeling that you have to be this way and that way for your family, but nobody sees who you are. You can't go on living this way. So it will be necessary to make some changes. It's just that simple. Now, I'm not saying the person says, Eureka, I'm not going to commit suicide. That's the most fabulous thing I've heard. But that's a step forward because the person then says to you, that's right, I can't continue living this way. I'll have to make some changes. They've already started to shift out of this tremendously dark place they were in. So what I'm talking to you about is I don't say, oh my God, stay away from me with that kind of behavior. You got to change it. That's sick. What I do, and we train you to be able to, how can I use this behavior in a positive way? One has to, I would not do exactly that with every patient because it's an improvisation. It's not a protocol. And then there are strategies. What are strategies? Strategies are different approaches that I can use to help create not only the connection between us, but a safe place where profound learning can take place. Most people mistakenly, and it doesn't work very well, think, well, I'm going to go to the therapist, and the therapist is going to tell me what to do, and I do it, and I change my life. And of course, people are people, and so when you tell them what to do, and I can hardly tell myself what to do. I'm working on my life. How would I know what to tell you to do in your life? Yeah, I can say, don't kill yourself. That's not going to help. But I can try and create an environment where you can begin to regulate yourself. What does that mean? That person that says, I want to kill myself, is totally dysregulated. They're in kind of a chaos. So you regulate. Once you're regulated, mindfulness is one way. It's just the first step. But then let's go into an inner awareness. If you feel safe with me and you know that I'm only there to help you move forward in a life and make a better life, and I'm going to see if we can't open up new information, more possibilities. Then when I create with you, it's not I give to you, but we co-create a profound learning, then the tremendous difference that occurs is now you can look inside. And my experience, and it just mirrors what Erickson said, is the client then becomes responsible for, which is an empowerment, and they are their own therapist. They will often start telling you how they might change some of their responses or the way they might be thinking or how they could observe it in a different way. And when they're telling you what they need, they don't resist it. When I say, well, why don't you look at it this way? I heard a terrible case of someone who their entire family was killed in the car crash, but they weren't, but they were 5 months in the hospital. They were in terrible, terrible, terrible shape. And they almost died. And this was 20 years ago. They had never, ever even talked about how everybody in the car died but them and so on. And when they tried to talk about it, a well-meaning therapist would say, yes, but God wanted you to survive. That's the past. There's gone. There's nothing we could do about that. When the environment became safe, 20 years later, they could start grieving. Do you know how much of their life energy was stopped, was stuck? Because nobody said, oh my God, you lost your mother, your father, and your sister and 2 brothers in the same car crash, and you were 5 months, and it took years to heal, and you were told you were lucky. So this utilization of and strategies, very, very, very important. And so there are strategies to help co-create and help the client to begin to suggest therapeutically what they need to do. And then they do it. People say, well, why, when I suggested to the client they do X, Y, Z? I had this happen with a client, and it was very important. There was a tremendous amount of trauma, so I suggested that she draw the trauma, and she could color it in, and she could put, if she wanted some animal guide, or she had a spiritual guide, or she had a friend to draw it in, and just take one trauma and represent it on a piece of paper. The next week when we met again, she said, I didn't do the homework. My attitude was, oh, I don't know, but I'm curious to know what happened when you tried to do the homework. She said, as soon as I started drawing what was on the paper, I became overwhelmed with the trauma, and so I stopped. Congratulations, I said. That was the wrong assignment for you. If you get overwhelmed by the trauma, that's only going to make the trauma worse. Oh, I'm sorry. It's very important in the Ericksonian framework, and that's what also makes it. That wasn't a good fit for you. I didn't pay attention to the tailor-made. I have an idea. Are you willing to close your eyes? She said, sure. I said, can you imagine the trauma as a shape, a color, a texture on one side? And she said, yes. And then she said, yeah, it's dark black and has spines. And okay. Now, can you imagine if that trauma was cleared out of your sensing it? What color, shape? It'd be a beautiful green and be like a leafy jungle. Okay. Now imagine you're going to slowly swing from the trauma to the cleared trauma and see like a clock pendulum where that stops. And wherever it stops is okay. And she did this and she said, oh, this doesn't scare me so much. She said, it's about here. She moved about 30% along the path. She said, part of the blackness is gone and there's a kind of smoky green that's turning greener beginning to appear. I said, great. So part of the strategies too is here's your homework. Each night or in the morning, whichever you find is more comforting to you, could be in the middle of the day too. I don't know. This is a Ericksonian phrase, but you will know. Always empowering the client. I want you to pendulate, move back and forth, and don't push it, but see if eventually something in you knows how to clear up all of the stuff connected with that trauma, and it's clear, and how closely you can move to the green. Now, I share this with you because I did give her a very good assignment to draw, but that wasn't right for her. I wasn't in tune enough, and she was smart enough, and I congratulate her. Great. You didn't resist. You said, this is not right for me. And I heard you and I apologized. Now, often when you apologize, the client will say, oh, that's okay. You were doing your best. I say, no. There's a little boy inside or a little girl inside, and they need to know that I'm sorry that I have to tune in better to you. This is really important. And I am happy to say I will never know what she resolved in relationship to that one particular trauma. But eventually, within 2 or 3 weeks, it was smooth and a beautiful forestly green with many shades. And she said, things around that trauma, which she never told me what it was, used to trigger me and I used to start getting angry. I don't get angry about things that were connected to that anymore. I said, great, that's another step. That's with the forward flow. Also, one of the things that Erickson really promotes and we don't realize is that even when I'm unhappy with the way I'm living part of my life, and we've all been there with that, I'm unhappy with the way I'm living my life, something in me is also comfortable. I know how to cope with choosing yet another bad girlfriend. I know how to cope with making mediocre business decisions. I am hot-tempered. I get angry too easily, but I know how to deal with it. I'm comfortable with that. Now, you can say to somebody, well, you're comfortable with that. They're going to fight with you. But you can assume that it's a habit pattern, and even though they don't like the results, and it doesn't achieve what they wanted to achieve, what they are involved with is a status quo and equilibrium. So Erickson said in all of his work, you have to create a destabilization. If you don't destabilize, no matter how hard you work, no matter how committed and how hard the client is working, it's going to stay the same. So some of the strategies help to destabilize And you have to help the person with resources, because when we destabilize our inner state, we have to be able to tolerate that destabilization. Otherwise, we go right back to the old behavior. So I'm destabilized now. What I want to do is have the resources to tolerate a level of chaos. And as the therapist, I may suggest possible alternatives to new possibilities. Your non-conscious mind, your inner wisdom, will choose the one that's right for you. I don't know the one that's right for you because I'm not you. I choose the one that's right for me. My choosing the one that's right for you would be choosing the one that I think would work for me, so probably would work for you. Doesn't work. You will choose, because you're the one who knows, from the possibility. Now, there's a possibility with that possibility of new associations. With new associations come a reassociation in a different format, and then a restabilization. And then the important thing is that you give time for, well, they use a fancy word, consolidate, to reorganize. You know, when I'm at the gym and I'm lifting weights, I lift the weights 1 or 2 times, and my trainer says to me, stop in between each lift, give your muscles time to reorganize so that they're really doing the lifting they should be doing. Well, it's the same with our inner awareness and psyche is, okay, now I have new associations, reassociations. I now have a different outlook. So if I put that into memory, then anything that refers to what was the old outlook is going to be referred to the new outlook, and my behavior will automatically start changing. But I have to give time for it to reorganize. So I will, as we go through a session with somebody, be involved with what seems to be, but it's not, small talk, giving you time to begin the integration. I want to see enough integration so that when we stop and it gets put into storage or memory, it is reorganized enough that it becomes the new reference point. And that makes a big difference, because how many of us have discovered something and then immediately try to enact it, and maybe we do for a short period of time, and then we're back to the same old behavior. Erickson's power is putting together a reconditioned experience, because part of hypnosis is believed in imagination, and anybody can have a daydream or a night dream, can have believed in imagination. This new possibility has consolidated or reorganized itself. It goes into memory, and all the old references now have to change because it's not the same, and new references are referring to a much expanded way of viewing the world around me. Something else that makes Erickson's work very powerful is experiential learning. You know, I was for many years 4 times a week as a psychoanalytic patient, because I had to do that. First of all, I needed it. So it was changing my life. I'm not a masochist. I was progressing, but I learned a lot about how to think about and to construct a historical construction of my life, but in classical analysis, and even in some of the modern, more recent forms, even in the relational psychoanalytic field, there's not experiential learning. I was thinking of one analyst who was presenting a case before me, and I had not supervised her before. And she said, well, the real problem I have with this client is that all my other supervisors have helped me to analyze him, but this is somebody who's 50 years old and he doesn't play. He never plays. He doesn't know how to play. And then she said, and this supervisor suggested this, and this supervisor suggested that. He doesn't play. And she said, so what would you suggest? My poor supervisee went into shock when I said, do you play? She said, of course I do. I said, well, how do you think he's going to learn to play? She said, are you suggesting that I should play with him? I said, well, his mother and his father are dead, so they're probably not. He doesn't know how to play. He sees you 3 times a week and has for years. What would you do if your child doesn't know how to play? For many of you in the pandemic know that your children are having trouble because they're not with other children and not playing the way they used to. And we know that real change, real learning, and there's a lot of research on this, comes from the ability to play. I said, well, if you want me to supervise you, you got to start playing with him. How about a light sponge ball, and while he's sitting there, say, here, catch, and throw it to him. How can I do that? I said, you don't know how to throw a ball? She said, of course, but this is analysis. Learning takes place in play. I can understand you might have some concern because he'll probably move very quickly and may not want analysis in another year or 2 or less. Yes, if you want to work with me, and this comes from my work with Erickson, and I'm kind of a playful person, so it was awfully nice finding a place where I knew that play is the major way of learning, but I expect to play until I'm 110. Play ball with him or different things, or ask him to bring in games. Do you have puppets? She said, well, no. I said, well, get some puppets and give him one and give one and carry on the analysis with a puppet. She was in shock, but she came back the next week and she said, I thought you were crazy. I said, I probably am, but if it works, use it. She said, I threw the ball. She said, he was curious. I said, right. I don't know, but I'm curious to know how you feel about that. She said, actually, we played ball. And I asked him, she didn't even know she was being Ericksonian, to go and buy 2 hand puppets. One would be for me and one would be for him because we're going to play with them next time. And he brought them in this week. All I can say is hallelujah. Amen. And all of this is about Erickson did not have a philosophy. As a matter of fact, he refused to have a theory because he said, as soon as I make my work and write out a theoretical approach to my work, you're going to have protocols, and protocols will undermine everything I do. But he had these competencies, and he had hypotheses. Hypotheses don't necessarily have to be connected to theory. And he's not Buddha, and he's not Immanuel Kant, and he's not a philosopher. And, you might say that there's the Freudian theory. You can't say there's Ericksonian theory, but there are these basic competencies. And he said, all human beings, when they can move into that inner awareness and contemplate, that from conception, we have, not totally, but we have a lot of the information we need to be self-healing, and that we are totally capable of doing that. Now, Erickson recognized that there were some things that interfered. If you've had a lot of trauma in your life. There were periods when you were traumatized and it was very active that you didn't learn. You don't learn when you're in a trauma state. So there may have been things at different times in your life you just didn't learn. And there are other things that can interfere with you having some of the resources to make you resilient. Because the pandemic is a perfect experience for that. You're surviving the pandemic, but in what shape? You have to have resilience. Because if you think this is the end, we're going to go back to the old way. No, and we can't even say we understand the new way, because the new way is slowly emerging, and it's going to be very different for all of us. But it's not how far you fall, but how high you bounce that really makes the difference here. And so resilience means being able to have enough resources. And most of Erickson's work is about resources, and empowering the client. That what I say is that at the end of every session, if I feel humble, I've been in the presence of another human being, and you know what? They opened a door that they couldn't imagine opening, and I didn't know how they might open it, but we found a way, they created a way. So if I feel humble by this little step that I just witnessed, that human being moved forward toward their destiny, toward their evolution, and the client feels empowered. This is so important, because in this world that disempowers us from families that may have been well-meaning, but they disempowered us. We all have a feeling of helplessness, which can go into hopelessness if we don't have resilience. When the client said, I'm thinking of killing myself, that's not what I was expecting to hear. Oh, the hopelessness that was in the room in that moment. And I just breathe. I may look very calm, but I'm a human being. I'm really feeling, I'm in panic. What the hell do I do with this? Well, you know what the hell I do with this? Admit, I don't know, but I'm very curious to know. And since I've admitted I don't know what to do, I have no investment in figuring out what to do. And now my energy is liberated. And something comes to mind. That's why I could say, yeah, you can't continue living this way, and you can't continue living this way, and you can't continue living this way. You've got to change the way you're living. And that little shift allowed us to begin to talk about life experiments and experiences they could have. So it reinforced life-affirming energy. And she moved out of, within a very short period of time, I might have a suicidal feeling, but I'm not going to do that because I have possibilities. So that feeling a sense of awe or amazement at what human beings can live through, what they can solve, that really seeing them, hearing them, and valuing them. And just my only agenda is perhaps there are some new possibilities, new information that will help you to find your way so that you continue to evolve in positive ways in your life. And the pandemic is a perfect time for that, because we can either panic, which is okay, because once the panic is over in us, we can become much more productive. But, I have found, being Ericksonian, we're in crisis, but I don't have to be in crisis. I'll repeat that. Yes, we're in a crisis, but I don't have to be in crisis. This is very important. And when my co-founder of ACT Institute came to me, and when he said, Stephen, our students can't meet in person. You have to do this, some of it online. And I was a bit dramatic, and I went, oh no, and I don't want to do it online, and how can I? And that night I thought, I'm comfortable with not having to do it online. That would be uncomfortable, but all change is uncomfortable. And with what I've been through in my life, and after 55 years of clinical practice, and all these areas I've studied, and all the changes I've seen since Freud, I can't design something that's really effective online. Well, I certainly can try. And I can tell you that the crisis opened up a new possibility, because I must admit, it's a lot of hard work, but then so is making your life work. And I've done that. So, and it's very challenging and very exciting. And it's not opened up and made it available to many more people in Brazil, because as you know, being Brazilian, it's a very large country and not everybody can come in to a training from the other side of Brazil. And more important is that we're doing everything, or most everything, online. But of course, I always work with a translator, but I started designing it first in English with backgrounds and videos and all sorts of things to facilitate deeper and more profound learning in the Ericksonian sense. And even more importantly, there are many countries where English is a second language. And suddenly we got a call from Egypt, and they said, we've heard really good things about your online course, and somebody viewed some of it in English. And our population here is bilingual that we work with. Will you teach in Egypt? Will you teach in Iran? Will you teach in India? Well, in this moment, I can't go there. Eventually, part of the training is presential, but look at the opportunities that I opened up to really, and this is my purpose and mission, is to really train the next generation of therapists to be the best therapists they can be within an Ericksonian framework, and using all the other training they have, and step beyond Erickson, because this was his dying wish that we take his work further. And here in Brazil, his work is most alive, and eventually it will be evolving in the hands of Brazilians. So I guess I'll end with what makes me happy is fulfilling that mission to help other people learn how to help themselves, and in doing so, create a better life for themselves and people around them. And I always feel that when a client walks into my office, why has the universe put us together? Because I'm bound to assist them in healing something in themselves, and they will help me heal something in myself, because we're two human beings. And that wonderful possibility of being humbled by our essence, our humanity, because Erickson's work is one human essence meeting another human essence, and there's where the magic happens. And that the person I'm co-creating with feels more empowered. So that's what I have to say for now. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you've been curious, and I don't know, but I hope you're curious to want to know more about how Ericksonian therapy and Ericksonian hypnosis might contribute to your well-being and to your life.